Welcome, everyone. I'm Garry Schliefer, and I am the host of today's podcast, Beyond the Page. And I am the publisher of Choice, the magazine of professional coaching. In each episode, we go beyond the page and dive deeper into some of the most recent and relevant topics impacting the world of professional coaching. Exploring the content, interviewing the talented minds like we have right here behind the articles, and uncover the stories that make an impact. Choice is more than a magazine. For over 20 years, we've built a community of like-minded people who create, use, and share coaching tools, tips, and techniques to add value to their business and, of course, to impact their clients. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Susana Rinderle, who is the author of an article in our latest issue.
Dun, dun.
Now, interestingly, her article is entitled, and I've been waiting to publish this one for a while, so thank goodness we found it, a place for it. It's entitled Trauma-Informed Coaching, Necessary, Better, and Not About Trauma, which I love. Susana is an MA, a PCC, a writer, a poet, a transformational life and leadership coach, and trauma-informed resilience practitioner. One would expect no less. Her first career was in diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership development, where she spent nearly 30 years garnering results for employers and clients across the US and abroad in multiple sectors, including nonprofit, corporate, healthcare, education, and government. Susana is a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation, also known as a PCC. She's a mentor coach and a certified facilitator of the Resistance Toolkit, which she'll tell us more about. She held a university position in Guadalajara, Mexico, and was the co-founder and first manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the University of New Mexico Hospitals. For 20 years, she was the president of, no kidding, Susana Rinderle Consulting, and is a former principal consultant for Korn Ferry in the leadership development practice. Now, do you say you're a former TEDx speaker? You're a TEDx speaker. Hello. Those things go on forever.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's still on the YouTube. Yeah.
And your articles have appeared in multiple commercial and academic publications. And finally,
Choice.
You're at Choice Magazine. We did it. Yay.
Yay.
Susana, thank you so much for being here today and for joining me in this conversation. I have to admit, seriously, I know why you decided to write this article. I know that's question number one. Like, you just have to read your bio and know why this is very important to you. When you read the article, it's personal. Is there anything else you want to add to the reason behind the article?
Ooh, that's a great question, Gary. And thanks so much for inviting me to be in conversation. I'm really glad the article finally found a home as well. Why? I mean, I'm pretty transparent in the article and in my work that it is personal. I do identify as a trauma survivor. Those that are familiar with the ACEs score, the adverse childhood experiences, I have a high ACEs score. I'm a person living with mental illness and have benefited from many different mental health and other types of healing modalities for most of my life. And the article opens with one story of how there was a rupture with my coach because the coach was not trauma informed, and I was not either at the time. So
right,
neither one of us understood.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Right, neither one of us understood what was happening. It was not handled effectively, and not only was harm done, minor harm, the relationship ended. Yeah. So it is very personal, and as I became certified in the resilience toolkit and became more trauma informed myself as a practitioner, so many things started firing in terms of where coaching and the trauma informed world can intersect, and should.
Yeah. And okay, you have to backtrack. What was that first test you said? ACEs? Explain
ACEs, ACE, adverse childhood experiences.
Is that a assessment or something?
It is. It's a body of work based on some research done in the late 90s, actually in Southern California. I think it was a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And he looked at, I don't remember what the catalyst was, but they looked at they worked with an insurance company, and they actually looked at folks with health insurance. So already that's a particular subsegment of the population, right? Who
Right. Yeah.
have jobs that pay well, that give benefits, etc. And they found a deeper connection between a set of adverse childhood experiences and various life outcomes, including chronic health conditions, than almost any other indicator. And that research has been continued to be built on and expanded. And we now increasingly understand how central trauma is to one's life outcomes, one's physical health, one's economic, success, relational, all these things are much more connected to sets of adverse childhood experiences.
Right.
And yes, one can Google that, one can take the assessment and find where they're at. There's only 9, so the max ACEs score is 9.
Okay.
But it's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, no kidding. Glad I asked. That sounds really good. Begs the question overall, before we get into any further, what exactly is trauma?
That's a great question, Gary, because I think I am super excited that the word trauma is increasingly normalized and destigmatized. I love that as a trauma survivor and as a trauma practitioner. However, I find that much like the coaching profession, as the trauma word and the coaching word has become more mainstream and normalized and commercialized, I think there's been a decrease in clarity and a decrease in power. So I'm glad the power of it. So I think I love that you're asking that really important question, because I think that's where a lot of folks get stuck. They have a misinterpretation of what trauma is. So there's sort of 2 main buckets. One is what's called trauma with a capital T trauma, or acute trauma. So that's one intense experience that we have. A lot of the early research was done on soldiers returning from combat, from World War I and then World War II. So it can be combat, it can be assault, it can be living through a natural disaster. So that would be capital T trauma, acute trauma. But there's also lowercase t trauma, which is chronic stress over time. So my 3 favorite definitions, none of which are mine, are trauma is too much too fast.
Too much too fast. Okay.
Too much too fast, or too much. I feel like I'm forgetting. It's funny how you say things over and over and then you forget what they are. Too much too fast.
Right.
Or too much too soon.
Okay.
So that's your capital T acute trauma. The too much for too long, or the not enough for too long, is the lowercase t, or chronic stress. And here's the thing, Gary. The body, trauma lives in the autonomic nervous system primarily, outside of the brain and the spinal cord. And the body doesn't know the difference between the 2. So the body doesn't know the difference between I was assaulted, or I lived through a tsunami, and I grew up in a family that wasn't able to meet my basic emotional needs, or I am navigating the world in a Black, brown, queer, or female body, or I've been working in a toxic workplace for the last 15 years. It all registers as trauma in the body. The other 2 favorite definitions that I like to share with people is, it's not what Dr. Gabor Mate, who's one of the people I most respect and who is actually an MD and done some really interesting work in this area, not just his writings, but his research. He says it's not what happens to us, but what happens inside us as a result of what happens. And that's a really, and it's based on a ratio between the stressor, the stimulus, the stimuli, the stressor, and the internal resources we have, many of which get into our nervous system, not through our own behavior, our own agency. So that's why a family or a community can go through kind of the same event, and some can come out severely traumatized. One person just stressed and the other person kind of walks away like nothing happened. It's because of that balance of stressors and resources.
Oh my
And
goodness. You talk about most families like mine, middle child, my sister, the youngest child, the baby, me, the oldest one. And it's, that their life experiences, although in the same household, are like vastly different. And what people remember in the same family that some remember and some don't, but what they remember is as important to them, trauma or not, right, is remarkable.
Yeah, because we make meaning. Our species name should be Homo narrans. We make sense of our reality through story.
Right.
And families are complex because I'm the oldest of three as well. And family, the family that each sibling comes into is actually a different configuration. But even when it comes to, like a car accident where empirically every person was in the vehicle and this is what happened, same thing, people can walk away from that very differently because of the balance of stressors and resources in their nervous system. The last definition I'll share that tends to land with people and really spark things for me is from Dr. MC McDonald, who says that trauma is an overwhelming, let me make sure I get this right because I like to be precise. An unbearable emotional experience that lacks a relational home.
Wow. Okay. What's an example of that?
So that means something unbearable and emotional happened to us, but we did not have a safe place to go and recover and heal and be supported.
Right.
We're the most social species on the planet, Gary.
Right.
We co-regulate with each other. And so when we don't have a place where we can do that and have that support and build back up our resources, that's one of the reasons that some people come out of things more traumatized than others.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you for writing and submitting this article. Like I said, we couldn't fit it in when it originally came in, but I'm glad we fit it in here.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
that you're
Me
here.
too.
So, okay. I was taught that I shouldn't be talking about trauma or mental health in coaching. How do you reconcile trauma-informed coaching with our professional scope of practice? Yes. Rolls her eyes and go.
Yeah, this is a big one and it's really important. When I do my short talks, I actually bring up a slide with an elephant on it. And I go, okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room here. I could see and notice some of the nervous systems. Yeah, some of the nervous systems are having a response. So let's go there. And I think kind of there's 3 or 4 things that I like to say to that. First, trauma is in the coaching, whether you notice it or talk about it or name it at all. One of the coaches I most respect in this field is my colleague and friend, Julia Von Smith in the UK. And she says, working with trauma in clients and ourselves is the norm for coaching, not the exception.
Wow.
So you said you gave that very kind bio about me. And so folks know that I have spent 30 plus years in the DEI and anti-racism space. And I kind of draw parallels there that now we are finally recognizing that to name, acknowledge, and explore one's cultural, racial, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, and neurodivergence is not only welcome, but important. Trauma is the same, in my opinion. It's in the room, whether we name it or not. So we might as well go there and destigmatize and normalize. So that's the first thing, is that trauma is in the session and in you as the coach. Whether no, not me,
not me.
which is a trauma response. So it's there anyway, number one. Number two is it's now a must-have. So that's why I say in the article that it's necessary. Life is traumatizing.
Well,
birth is traumatizing.
You've said it quite clearly. At this point, there isn't anyone on the planet who hasn't, well, except for maybe newborns, but their birth, that hasn't been traumatized. Like, for example, the pandemic. Wow, that just took us all. And there's still residual. I know people that still won't leave their homes because they're afraid. Yeah, those are trauma responses. And I want to be very clear
to you and the listeners that when I say trauma response, there is no shame, there is no stigma. Those are the beautiful, genius responses of our bodies to keep us safe. So we celebrate and we work with that, but we don't shame it. But yes, those are trauma. There is not a family, community, organization, or boardroom that is not trauma-free. Some of my most traumatized clients, Garry, have been C-suite leaders.
Yeah.
And so,
wow.
To your point, we have also created this thing that we call civilization that is also deeply traumatizing. I mean, not to mention the lowercase t trauma that most of us have from our childhoods and our upbringing in a family and community, and, isn't equipped to meet our needs. But our nervous systems are being bombarded by stimuli. We have foods available in the industrialized Western world 24 hours a day, year round, that our bodies aren't equipped to manage all the time. We are, most of us live alone or live in a nuclear family. We're in cars. I mean, there's all these things that are traumatizing to the human nervous system that we spent hundreds of thousands of years not dealing with. And so let's just normalize that it's there. So that's why it's necessary now, is that, global pandemics, economic instability, political violence, eco grief, climate change. I mean, hello, it's hot as heck right now everywhere at the time of this recording. So, it's there in the room, and that's now a must have. And I would say the other two things that I would kind of cheekily say to this, Garry, is that,
cheekily,
as an ICF mentor coach, being trauma informed maps very nicely onto the competencies, particularly the most important ones around trust and safety.
Number 4, cultivates trust and safety. It was funny. I was rereading your article and reading the 6 points that coaches can use to be better trauma informed. And it really brought that up for me of trust and safety and the different competencies that kind of open up the door for us to work with our clients under this umbrella.
Yeah. And I kind of take a soapbox approach occasionally with my mentees that trust and safety is the most important competency. So being trauma informed, because that's the foundation of everything else that comes. So being trauma informed maps very importantly and nicely onto trust and safety, as well as coaching presence, listens actively, and evokes awareness. And the last cheeky thing I'll say is that every time my talks at ICF chapters and my own workshops are submitted to ICF for CCEs, they're approved. So if this were not, in alignment with the professional coaching field, my sense is that probably wouldn't be happening. Right, so when I hear things like I just heard this week from some students in my trauma-informed coaching class, 2 of the participants brought this up again, and they said, Susana, help us understand more about this part, because I was told in my training program very clearly to not ask about mental illnesses, because I was talking at that moment about how one of the things that I do as a trauma-informed coach is to ask more detailed intake on a questionnaire. The question is always voluntary, it's not required, but that really brought things up for folks in terms of I was told to not ask. And again, my thing is, it's there. Yeah. We're not mental health professionals. We're not diagnosing. We're not giving them treatment. But I got to tell you, just asking that question and making it optional has built tremendous trust and safety with my clients, and give me immense information that I can either bring curiosity into the session, educate myself, or keep it in mind in terms of my own training. So it's really invaluable, I think.
Oh my goodness, no kidding.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but go look in it. I mean, you're looking, you're acknowledging and respecting the client's unique talents, insights. So there's one right there. Acknowledges and supports the client's expression of feelings, perceptions, concerns, beliefs. Demonstrate openness and transparency as a way to display vulnerability, just on both sides of the fence. And there's one more that came up for me, which I found was really interesting, and I'd love for coaches to hear what you have to say about this, or maybe just to hear that we say. You said something about she's an experienced coach. Of course, in your head, you said she's an experienced coach. Of course, she's right. When she tried to get you to do something you couldn't. What I've been adding to my trust and safety segment of my work with my clients is reiterating we're equals, because there's a propensity for clients to think the coach is smarter than the client. So I keep bringing that in, along with other things like I'm a white man of privilege. How does that fit into your world? What's the impact of that? How, let me know when that, let's be open to a conversation. In particular, when I'm working with women, when I'm working with BIPOC, that sort of stuff, I like, and they pick me. It's like, they bring their history. Their history, in the example of what you're saying, happens to be about mental illness. We're not, like you said, we're not diagnosing, we're not doing. I think that, and this goes back to how differently people hear things. They probably wasn't exactly what was said. It was probably said,
very possibly,
right? Because I remember in my schooling and I've further developed it, is yes, you can ask about it. In fact, you're supposed to ask, are you seeking, are you exploring other modalities and you don't necessarily have to say therapy, but you can say it, right?
Yeah.
But let the client tell you. And then, do they know you're doing coaching, and what are their thoughts about that?
What is coaching?
And what is coaching? So marrying, even inviting the two in, I've done that forever. Yeah.
Well, and that also maps onto the competency of establishing agreements.
Right.
But I would say, first of all, a person can be traumatized, be carrying trauma, and not have a mental health diagnosis. They're two separate things, right? So there's
good point. Good point. Yeah.
And the other thing is that, yes to what you're saying, and there is a deeper somatic quality, somatic meaning body oriented, to saying things that I think most of us would be on board with, like we are equal.
Right.
We can say that, we can believe that, but how are we showing up with the client? There are a lot of very subtle ways that coaches coerce clients.
Oh.
And that harms equity, and that harms trust and safety. But a lot of those practices are very subtle, and they are not trauma informed. So for example, when we ask closed-ended questions when an open-ended question would have been more appropriate or more effective, what is our nervous system response when the client says no, or sets a boundary, or does resistance? How do we inside, how does our nervous system respond to that? We also ask a lot of coercive questions, again, without realizing it, like, did you get what you wanted out of today's session? Instead of, oh, client, you said you wanted to get this out of the session today. How did we do? Or what was your number one insight from today?
That's where I go with, so what are you leaving the call with today?
Right. Yeah. Did you get what you
interesting.
Want? That's
simple wording.
It's very simple, but it's subtle. And these are just a few examples of how we subtly and unconsciously coerce the client that undermines equity. So anyway, that's a lot of words to kind of say yes, and there's like more underneath these things that I think most of us are bought into from a values perspective and know we can and should be doing, but then how we're actually showing up in the moment, this is where coaching presence comes in, can actually be counter to those things we say we believe and should be doing.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Susana,
right?
this is amazing information. Yeah, there's a lot there, and there's a lot to do. And it begs the question, what would you like our audience to do as a result of this article and this conversation?
That's a great question. Well, I outline in the article the 6 ways that coaches can be. Ta-da! There it is.
Page 48, and I've marked it with a CCE.
All right. Yeah. The 6 ways that clients can be more trauma informed. I actually wrote an additional article, not in choice, but about those 6, about those 6. But those, the number one, and when I teach my class, this is when I talk about what coaches can do differently, this is also number one. So number one on the list in Choice and in my class, and sort of what I hope is my consistent message, is number one, coaches, get on your own healing journey. So our own healing journey around trauma. And I say journey because one does not need to be completely healed to be an effective coach. If that were true, I would not be coaching. It's a journey. So that integrity and that commitment to our own healing and to learning effective self-regulation practices. Now, regulation does not always mean calm. That's another word that's getting misconstrued out there right now. Self-regulation does not mean always calm. It means that our nervous system response matches the moment, that our bodies are fluid in terms of how we're responding. And there's more to it than that. But we can't, because trauma lives and expresses in the body and doesn't require our awareness or even an emotion. Healing modalities and approaches that are somatic, that are body oriented, are very important. And that's part of what I teach in my class, which is the second thing I would offer readers to do, is that I have a 3-week class called Trauma Informed Coaching: What to Know, Notice, and Do to Serve All Clients Better. So they can enroll in that. You can find that at susana.link/events.
SUSANA-LINK dot.
It's susana.link, LINK/events.
No .com? Oh, that's a new one.
.com. Susana.link/events.
Okay.
And I'm offering a 15% off for the listeners through September 15th if you enter code CHOICE15 at checkout, but that's only good for the first 10 folks. So
hurry,
run,
start the card.
Yeah, and folks can also visit my website, Trauma Informed Coaching USA, where they can read more of my articles, learn a little bit more. I'm also a big believer in growing the pie, not fighting over crumbs. So I do have other programs and other partners that I recommend for folks, and I'm very discerning about those because there are some programs out there that miss really important pieces around the somatics and around the ecology of trauma, meaning the history and the institutions and the geography around the individual, not just the individual. So anyway, there's resources there, and I'm happy to talk to folks one-on-one if they'd like to increase their learning, or if they or their clients would like to experience trauma-informed coaching. I'm also open to working with folks.
Oh, awesome. Very generous. And again, that website is?
The trauma-informed coaching website is traumainformedcoachingusa.com.
Got it. And is that where they'll also find your other writing about the 6 steps?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
As well as a link to the events page. So everything's right there.
Everything's right there.
One-stop shop. Yeah.
Hey, making it easy for people to avoid trauma in the process.
Exactly. So finding more ways to, you're exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. Well done. Walking the talk.
Thank you.
Susana, thank you so much for joining us for this Beyond the Page episode. It's been an absolute delight, and thanks again for writing the article. Don't be a stranger. If you feel something else, remember, we have the Kaleidoscope column, which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So
okay.
Mental note. Thanks again.
Garry. Appreciate your time.
And yours. That's it for this episode of Beyond the Page. For more episodes, subscribe via your favorite podcast app. I do. I listen to myself. Isn't that horrible?
Wow.
No, I learned just as much listening. Yeah, very brave. While you're, if you're not a subscriber to Choice Magazine, you can get a free digital issue by going to choice-online.com and clicking the Sign Up Now button. I'm Garry Schliefer. Enjoy the journey of mastery.